Well, good morning. Did you have a good week in the Lord? Jackson's smiling. He did. We did. We've enjoyed our company. I'm in my uniform this morning because I wasn't going to be outdone by my father-in-law. So I know. No, I trust you did have a good week in the Lord. It's good to have Morgan and Jackson. Pleasant surprise. I asked her last week, I said, have y'all settled into a routine? And she says, we have. I said, that's good. We all kind of get into a routine, don't we? I know you that have the summer off, know you have to get back into that routine when school takes back in, you that teach. And it seems like life can get humdrum, don't it? It does. But because He lives, we can face tomorrow. I know He holds the future. He's already there. But are we accomplishing anything for God? Is God using us? Ben was talking about this is going to be a new adventure for him. He'll be leaving us. And I told him, I said, I'm not where I started out at. I'm in a different location. The Lord moves us at times. And we don't see it. We think because we're not doing something spectacular, or we're not doing something extraordinary, that God's not working through us. We're in Ruth chapter 2. Ruth chapter 2. And we know that Ruth here went out to glean with Boaz, or she just so happened, as we talked about last time, God being the God of happenstances. John, I reflected on how we wound up at Applebee's that night. Just so happened. It didn't just so happen. But I got to thinking, in looking at this right here, and my question is God using me? Listen, most of the time, what God does to us, we'll never live long enough to see the results of it. And these two people here that are going to come together here, they're not doing nothing spectacular. They're living their lives. They're in their routine. But they're doing one thing different that the world doesn't do. I mentioned my life verses is Proverbs 3, 5, and 6. Trust in the Lord with all thy heart and lean not into thine own understanding. And verse 6 says, in all thy ways acknowledge Him, and He shall direct thy paths. Let's look here. Let's start. We'll read this in verse 1 again. We'll start here. And Naomi had a kinsman of her husband's, a mighty man of wealth of the family of Elimelech, and his name was Boaz. So the writer here is preparing us for this guy that's going to enter in and who he is. And Ruth the Moabitess said to Naomi, Let me now go to the field and glean ears of corn after him whose sight I shall find grace. And she said unto her, Go, my daughter. More reflection here on what kind of person Ruth is. She asked permission. Can you see what a humble servant this lady is? That's all in it. In all our ways, I've got to thinking about this. Brother Evan prayed that last week about us keeping this in front of us throughout the week. In everything I'm doing there today, am I acknowledging Him? Right before we left, I had a call come in, somebody needing help. And it kind of aggravated me a little bit, and the Lord said, this is what I got for you. Do it. And it was another church. And I was able to help them get their stuff back online and get going. And I'm learning to acknowledge Him in all my ways. If I want to be, listen, we get to be in on this. We have no right to this. Whose side I shall find grace? Grace is unmerited favor. I don't deserve what the goodness I've gotten. I don't deserve that my eyes have been opened. I should be thankful that I am and feel for those and pray for those who can't see it. But they're not doing nothing spectacular here. She's going to a field to glean corn. But she is working God's purpose because in all her ways she's acknowledging Him. She is a servant. She's humble. She has not, we've talked about before how Naomi's bitter about what God's done. And I have told y'all, I have thought that. Whom the Lord loveth, He chastens. And she said, Go, my daughter. And she went and came and gleaned in the field after the reapers, and her hap was to light on a part of a field belonging unto Boaz, who was of the kindred of Elimelech. And behold, Boaz came from Bethlehem, and said unto the reapers, The Lord be with you. And they answered him, The Lord bless thee. Then said Boaz unto his servants that was set over the reapers, Whose damsel is this? Whose damsel? Listen, God the matchmaker. God the matchmaker. God brought that woman into my life back there for a reason. Was Ruth looking for a husband here? See, a lot of times we want to look for something extraordinary. And I'm trying to encourage y'all because I fall into a rut where life just seems humdrum. What am I doing? Am I accomplishing anything for you, Lord? And if I'm not, it's because I'm not acknowledging Him in all my ways. I'm about Clay's will. I'm not going to be a servant. I'm going to be in charge. And when the Lord sends them things into my life, I become bitter. Why is this happening to me? Call me Mara. Rather than be like Ruth, may I go to the field? And the Lord begins to direct my steps, and I have to light upon the field of Jesus. And I can, listen, these gleaners here are actually getting crumbs from the Master's table. Y'all remember the verse we closed out with last week that Mike read? Galatians 6. And let us not be weary in well-doing, for in due season, not tomorrow, not right now, but in due season we shall reap if we faint not. Where's she at? She's in a field. They just so happen again to arrive at the barley harvest time. Whew! Listen, God is in control. If you had to look across this nation today, where would you say God's working? If you had to look into Israel during these dark times of the judges, when every man is doing that which is right in his own eyes, and it would look like God's not doing anything, God is working here. God is the main character of this little book here. And He is interacting with man. Israel needs a redeemer. Now, do you think Ruth and them would ever live long enough to see Solomon? But they were instrumental in it because they were acknowledging Him in all their ways. A man's heart deviseth its ways, but what? The Lord directeth his steps. A man's heart deviseth his way, but the Lord directeth his steps. Proverbs 16:9. So in the coming week, start looking for the fingerprints of God. Start looking for ways, in all thy ways acknowledge Him. Love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, and love thy neighbor as thy. Upon these hang all the commandments. You know what I want to do? I want to render evil for evil. When they call, I'll just ignore that call. I'll show them to call me on a Sunday morning. I'm about the Lord's work here. How dare they interrupt me? That's what I wanted to do. Woo, I shouldn't even be up here. But instead, I was like, you know what? This must be meant to be. And I'm just using that as an example because Monday morning, listen, what we do when we're not here can sometimes be way more important than what we do when we're here. I told y'all that story that time about the guy from Weight Watchers that went to that center that was very successful. They had a lot of clientele that had lost a lot of weight. And he went to a center and visited with them that they weren't having so much success. And they said, what is he doing? What are they doing at that meeting? Or at their meetings? He said, it's not what they're doing at their meetings, it's what they're doing when they're not at their meetings. And that's what this is. Listen, this is 1,000 decisions during the day. And the Lord's directing our steps. The Lord's, whose damsel is this? Just so happened. Just so happened. She wasn't looking for a husband. She hadn't been to farmersonly.com. But the Lord was still taking care of her. Our faith a lot of times has to outlast God's silence. It just does. And if your faith can't outlast God's silence, you'll fall out. You'll get weary in well-doing. And you'll faint. If Brother Harold was here, he could tell you how to grow a garden. That's a monotonous task. You got to get out there and break that ground up. Till it over. Plant the seeds. Keep the birds out of it. Get the weeds out of it. And 3 to 4 months later, if the Lord blessed you with any rain, guess what? You get to reap. And guess what? Other people too benefit when you reap. What's going to happen here? What's going to happen here? Boaz is going to have a son named Obed. Obed's going to have a son named Jesse. Jesse's going to have a son named David. And these are, as I mentioned last week, these are two unsavory characters. You've got Ruth, who is a Moabitess, descendants of Lot out of incest. Going to be in the lineage of Jesus. Where sin did abound, grace did much more abound. His mother was known as Rahab the harlot. Boaz's mother was known as Rahab the harlot when they arrived in Jericho. And she married one of the spies of the tribe of Judah. Grace. So I want to challenge us this week. Listen, you're probably not going to do anything extraordinary this week. You probably won't. I hope I don't make the paper. The last thing I want to do is be headlines. Most of us probably won't be remembered for what we do. It is thought that Samuel wrote this book to record how the King David came about. Because it stops with David. It does not record Solomon. So most of the times we will not live long enough to see what God has used us for. We're on this life stage a short amount of time. But while we're here, listen, Boaz is obviously a man of God. He's allowing the poor people to glean from his field. They're commanded to let the poor glean. Rather than circle the wagons and get the remnants and pick the field clean, they let the poor come behind them. That's money he gave up. That was a sacrifice. That's money he left on the table in our terms. But listen, he's acknowledging God. That's a commandment from God. She's following God's footsteps. So this coming week, like I said, you're not going to do anything extraordinary. Most of us won't. We won't do nothing to be remembered by the world. But if we're like them, if we're in the field, we're going about our daily lives, doing what we're supposed to do, we're at where we're supposed to be, and acknowledging Him in that. I can't be somewhere where I'm not supposed to be and acknowledge Him. Well, I can. I can get back home. I can get out of Moab and get back to Bethlehem. But let's look this week and look for the fingerprints of Jesus or God on your life. I was telling Ben I'm not where I started out. I have done a lot of reflecting on how God brought me where I'm at. And that causes a lot of thanksgiving. That causes a lot of worship. We're at the dead end of a dirt road this morning. Well, that sounds spectacular, don't it? They were just in an old field. But what God was going to do with these two people and what He was going to bring about, what God hath wrought. So don't think you're insignificant this week. God knows the numbers of the hair on your head. Some of us, it took Him longer to count them. But let's not let the devil lure us from the path. That's the key thing. Let's not let the devil cause us to fall out or faint because we're not doing nothing spectacular. We're living our lives. Guess what? That's what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to live our lives. There's nothing wrong with that. As long as we're acknowledging Him in it and giving Him the glory and the honor and the praise. And I began to ask Him, Lord, help me to know where my next step is supposed to be, because I don't want to step out of the way now. Because I begin to see I'm going to have to walk through the valley of the shadow of death. But it said, the psalmist said, I will fear no evil. But why? For thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. I pray you have a blessed week. And Ben, we'll be praying for you, buddy. Love you.